Here we are again. Woke up alive again. I'm glad everybody else did too. I'm pretty sure most of you did anyway, right? Now, what to do? More voices. More. Got up 4:30 this morning. Couldn't help myself. Went and picked up a buddy of mine and we drove an hour and a bit to go chase after some world-class, huge frickin' Roosevelt elk. Setting trail cameras and packing around 40 pounds of camera gear and hoping I'm going to see, I just hoping to try to get that. It's the best, most awesome, crisp, wicked video on a pristine West Coast river bed surrounded by massive cedars and spruce and other trees, obviously the big timber, and I just keep missing them. You know, I got one the other day, pretty good, but just not that video that I'm after, you know. And I recently just found another great big buck bull on a trail camera, and we heard him growling a couple times in the thick brush, but wouldn't come out. And then I looked at the SD cards, and there was a huge storm last night, just pouring rain, and you could see these guys dancing around in the rain all night long. So I guess by the time the sun came up, they were all pooped and laying down and wouldn't come out to play. Big Ike. So I guess we'll try that again. I'll try it again in a few more days. We're only here for another 6 days, and then we're out of here up north again. So, where are we? Where were we? Who needs to be heard? Many. And quick recap on yesterday. I hope everyone is picking up what the honest people are putting down when it comes to the good guys and the bad guys when it comes to truth. all truth, and especially the dominant topics that we share here on this channel. Don't forget who the bad guys really are, who's been playing a big role in keeping truth from you and playing a big role in keeping you all going around in circles chasing your tails. Right? Especially that one particular PhD douchebag. I mean, come on. You got to imagine having that kind of a mind where you think that you can keep delivering to the people dermal ridges and mid-tarsal breaks, gigantopithecus. For how many years? He gets to the point, it's at the stage now, they can see just how dumb that person sees all of you as. Just a bunch of frickin'. He's treating you and delivering to you and speaking to you as though you're just a bunch of frickin' pickles in a jar with no brain matter. Right? Very insulting, right? Very dark and devious, right? Shitbag. Red-handed, caught, exposed. I'm not going to stop. Now, yep, read an email yesterday that was read before. Oh well. Guess what? You wouldn't believe how many loose cannons email me and blow a gasket on me for repeating an email. I don't know how many times I told people you just go back to the door and ask for your refund for your ticket here. It's too easy. Just go ask for your ticket. Right? Now, who do we got? I think these are recent. And this email, I'm going to jump right into it before I start ripping everybody a new butthole. Right? I'm in one of those moods, I guess. I'm tired, a little frustrated. I had some camera failures today. Probably need a little more sleep, but I'll get it one day. Your intro's too long. And you're so stupid you can't figure out how to press the forward button. Really? And you got to email me about it. See what I mean, you guys? Sometimes you can believe the emails that I do receive, it'll come across that you guys don't know about. It makes me want to go, holy shit. Moving along. Very, 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 very tiny number of people compared to all the great souls here, right? Now, this email is titled, "The Only Time I Ever Saw Fear on My Dad's Face." It's got my attention. Hi, Steve. I hope you, Sarah, and the family are doing well. I sent you an email back in 2023 about an encounter that my mom, aunt, and brother had when he was only 3 years old in East Central Georgia. You may or may not remember it. They were sitting along the creek letting my brother play when they saw a Bigfoot sitting on a log watching my brother play. At the end of the email, I had said that would not be the last time my family would have an encounter with Bigfoot. So that's why I'm sending you another email today. Back in the summer of 68 or 69, my mother and another one of her sisters had planned a get-together with both families, and since all my family on my mother's side loved to fish and hunt, they decided that we would all meet up on a creek that my mother's family had grew up on. She had 4 sisters and 4 brothers, and fishing and hunting wasn't something they did just for fun. It was something that my grandparents and the family did to help feed the family of 10. So, this day the plans were to catch fish and cook them at the creek, something we grew up doing. There was many stories over the years of a wild man, or families of wild people in many different areas of this creek. The creek ran about 60 miles or so through 3 counties. I remember listening to my grandfather and other family members talking about things that had happened along this creek, people seeing the wild people and hearing them scream, throwing things, and people being ran away from the creek. The stories have been told for years by many different people. The creek is called Briar Creek and should have been named Snake Creek, as it has more snakes than any other places I've ever known about. You're guaranteed to see lots of snakes from walking anywhere on Briar Creek. At the time of our fishing trip, I was only 9 years old and loved fishing, but had reservations about going up the creek that day. There was 10 of us this day: my mother, my father, sister, brother, myself, my aunt, my uncle, and their 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter, and I was the youngest there. When we fished there, we would go up the creek about a half to a quarter mile and would have to cross the creek several times to get up the creek to all the really good fishing spots. The creek is dark water with lots of logs and stumps in the water, and deep in many places with snakes laying on lots of the logs and stumps. When we would have to cross the creek, the older of my 2 cousins would put me on his back so the water wasn't over my head. After crossing the creek about 4 times and seeing several snakes, we finally reached a place that we were going to start fishing and get a place cleaned off to make a fire and cook. So after everyone had been fishing for a while, my uncle decided he was going up the creek about another quarter mile or so to a place called Ned's Lake, which was a place on the creek where beavers had dammed the creek up and made what we called Ned's Lake, and the fishing was great, with lots of red-breast bluegill, largemouth bass, and every kind of catfish you could think of. After about 45 minutes of my uncle being gone up the creek, it had gotten quiet and calm, and we already had enough fish for my mother and aunt to start cooking. And just as they were about to start, we heard my uncle call out to my father and told him to get us all up and across the creek because something was coming. My father acted like he knew exactly what he meant and started rushing everyone to gather all the fishing poles and gear, as my mother and aunt had grabbed most of the cast iron pans and food and was already in the water and crossing the creek for the first time, going back towards the bridge where we parked the vehicles over a quarter mile away. We could hear my uncle coming back down the creek in a hurry. About this time, we could hear what sounded like logs and limbs being thrown and smashed against the trees. My cousin was trying to get me up on his back as we're already getting in the creek, and my dad is pushing us four boys across the creek. He had lots of stuff in his hands and was having somewhat of a hard time trying to get around all the logs and stumps in the creek, and at the same time trying to help us boys get to the bank on the other side of the creek. And as I'm on my cousin's back, I looked back at my father, and I could see fear on his face that I had never seen before. I looked up the creek to my uncle as he was in the water up to his chest, crossing the creek, still 50 yards from where he had been on the other side of the creek, and behind him, about 35 yards, I saw a tree about 18 to 20 foot tall, swinging from side to side so hard it looked like it was almost hitting the ground. Before that one stopped shaking, another one just beside it started shaking, and it looked like it was slapping it on the ground. By the time my uncle had caught up to us, limbs and logs were being thrown in every direction and sounded like a bull snorting and grunting all at the same time. My mom, aunt, sister, and cousin were still running and crying as we finally caught up with them. I can't say that I ever saw whatever it was, but the way it shook those trees and almost slapping the ground with them and throwing logs and limbs the way it did, there's no doubt in my mind that it was the wild man that I heard my grandfather talk about. We made it back to the bridge where we had parked and could still hear limbs breaking and stuff being thrown. And there's one more thing that I should mention. When we parked at the bridge, we always have to go up the creek to fish because on the opposite side of the bridge is posted United States Military Base, known as Fort Gordon, Georgia. The creek runs about 10 miles across the military base at that point, and there's nothing but swamp all the way across. But after all of this, it still wouldn't be the last time my mother would have an encounter. But I'll save it for another time, and I'll share the last encounter I had as well. Thanks, Steve, for all you do for all of us. The world needs more good people like you and your beautiful wife, Sarah. God bless you all. Appreciate the kind words, and the world needs more super awesome, brave people like you, Clarence. Way more people like you would make this world a way better place. And there you go. Right? Nothing we haven't really heard before, but someone had to be heard, and they were heard. What an impact that must have had on those men, especially your father, right? All because they weren't educated on the topic, right? Lied to, misled, misinformed, but not anymore. Appreciate you sending that email in big time. Can't wait to hear the other ones. More puzzle pieces. Tell this email. Steve D. from Northern Utah. As my puzzle gets more and more complicated and complex, I have come to a compelling question. Being a hunter and spending thousands of hours in the wild, granted nowhere near the amount of time as you, but still, we both know that predators, when stalking, are as silent as possible. They can and will move and stalk their prey in near silence. Usually, if they do make any noise at all, it will be in the last split second as they attack. So, getting to the question. We agree that the Sabe are massive and outclass us in terms of strength and power, speed, eyesight, smell, hearing, I would say all physical ways. Probably even intelligence, in most ways. But we see and hear all the accounts of tree knocks, rocks being thrown, howling, and such vocals, limbs breaking, trees shaking, footsteps, leaves rustling. Now I know that some, and or most, are and could be explained as intimidation to cause fear and anxiety, which they do very nicely. But I wonder, knowing the way predators do things, who really is being watched and quite possibly studied? There, I said it. Do you think that we, as being the single most populous on Earth, could be being watched and studied by putting us in fearful and stressful situations? To see what our reactions would be. I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on this. I do think, like you, that if they really meant us harm, that we stand little to no chance. Thank you for being the voice, Steve. Thank you for dedicating your time and energy to giving the people a voice and a place to unload the thing that inhibits their thoughts. You, sir, I give to your fellow man. Hold on a second. Quick note for us only. Message Red Dale, pass that on to the big boss. I appreciate your email. Are we being watched? Do you think? I have a funny feeling we're being watched and experimented on non-stop, don't you think? I think so. I think so. One of the experiments might be just to see how far they can push human beings before they snap mentally. Right? Especially today. It could be. It could be what's going down, right? You never know. You never know. But the look of shock and surprise and the sounds of shock and surprise when some of these forest people are caught being seen by us makes you kind of wonder. Maybe anybody else could write down their thoughts on your question in the comment section below in this video too, right? Good morning, Steve, and the rest of the knowers in the world. I've been in Northern California since Mom moved us down here after my dad passed in '77. I'm 58 now, and the first time I and Mom had an encounter, she had rented us a big house in the mountains outside of Weed, California, just above my cousin's trailer. I had to change schools. Wasn't unhappy about that as I got teased bad at Weed schools was bigger than rest of kids in my grade school call me Patty Squatch because of my size. I had no idea what a Sasquatch was till we moved up to the big house on the hill. I was doing my homework one night in the upstairs bedroom window. My pet pig started going nuts and the security light came on over the pig pen. There it was. I thought at first some hippie was watching me. I smiled, gave a peace sign. It just stood there watching my pet pig. Watching me. There's a bunch of typos, but I'll get through it. We'll get through it. We'll make it as smooth as we can. It stood there watching me, and my pet pig was still freaking out in his pen. This happened 3 nights in a row. I just sat there in my window, unafraid, talking to it like it was a friend. But he smelled bad. Mom had been smelling it too. I think she knew. She came up the stairs and saw who was talking too. She slammed the window shut and told me to get in the walk-in closet and take my sleeping bag, shut and lock the door behind me. I could hear it rubbing against the house. Mom put more wood on the fire and turned on every light in the house. That was also the night she about burnt the house down. She accidentally grabbed a chunk of RT and threw it in. Sorry, there's a whole bunch. I'll get there. Okay, this is how it's spelled. Grabbed, ACHUNK, a chunk, of RR, tie, N, threw in it. She wouldn't let me out of the closet until morning. She was terrifying still and walked me to the school bus stop. She never told me what it was, just that I should never go out in the woods alone. This is the first of a lifetime of encounters I've had More to come. Thank you, Steve and Sarah, for everything good you all do in the world. P.S. How do I get a sticker? I think after all these encounters, I've earned it more to come. Peace. Always, Patty Whalen, a.k.a. Patty Squatch. Okay, gotcha. Send more. How do you get a sticker? The description's in the link is in the description below in the video description. And thanks for reminding me. Actually, Sarah was a little upset last night. She had about, I don't know, she gets a lot of people give her their incorrect address, and she can easily prove that through the email. And then people get upset with her when their package doesn't arrive. She just vented last night at me. And when she has to resend your package because you put down the wrong mailing address, it costs her another $9. She eats it up. So she's basically doing it. It's costing her money when that happens, all right? So please, if you order a sticker, decal off of Sarah, please put your correct address because it just costs her money to correct it, and she's too kind, and she just corrects it and eats it up anyways, but it's happened a lot. And believe me, there isn't a pile of money over here. Okay. Cruising right along. Who's next? Don't forget, you guys, when you hear about people doing bad things, lying and misleading your community, anyone in your home, you expose them and speak the name out loud, all right? No matter what. I keep trying to get that message to everybody and pound in their heads. A couple quick stories. Title of this email. Hi, Steve. Call me Chris. I truly appreciate all you do for this community. It's a unique outlet for thoughts, experiences, and theories deemed nonsensical by most of society. I grew up in rural New York State in the Finger Lakes region. I spent most of my time as a kid outdoors hunting, hiking, camping, fishing, and climbing. I wasn't great at any of those activities, but sure did enjoy the hills and mountains of what I considered my home. I took solitary refuge in those oak beech maple forests away from other people. You see, I came from a pretty messed up family of physical abuse, chemical dependency, and dysfunction to the extreme. You're not alone. Many have as well, just so you know. My brother and I have heard from others on several occasions that statistically, kids who grow up in families like ours typically are now either in prison or dead. I'm thankful to be neither. Me too. Good work. I now work for a government agency in Boulder, Colorado. Oh. Just kidding, man. Sort of. I got a bit of information and a couple of stories to convey, and I'll be brief. Story 1, back in 1996, I met a beautiful woman through mutual friends that agreed to be my wife. Given my tendency towards suppressed anger, rebellion, and disconcerting behavior, I never thought this would happen. 29 years later, and by some miracle of God, we're still together. Good for you. I was living in Boston, Massachusetts as a young architect when we met, and she in San Francisco. I decided to move to California to be with her and reestablish myself in the design community there following our marriage. She flew to Beantown to help me move. We managed to filter down all I owned into my little Acura and busted out on the road for the 3,000-mile drive to the Bay Area. The trip was a relatively uneventful journey most of the way. After a day and a half driving, we found ourselves in western Nebraska, I-80, at about 3:30 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere. I'd been behind the wheel for 10 hours and just hammered with exhaustion. My fiancée was in a similar condition. We decided to pull over at the next available exit and sneak in a quick regenerative nap. The exit off the highway was extremely rural with zero development for as far as the eye could see. To this day, I am unable to find this particular location on that map's application. And as you can imagine, with no moon and stars all around us was thick, inky blackness, where all physical features disappear into the night. Literally, we could not see our hands in front of our faces. We both reclined our seats and dozed off. I have no idea how long we were asleep, perhaps 45 minutes, when we were simultaneously startled from deep REM. When I say startled, I mean it was as if a bomb went off next to the car. I've not had that feeling repeated in my life. A massive, gut-wrenching terror pounded deep within my chest and radiated outward until it filled my body. My fiancée felt the identical sensation. Something very evil, very malignant, was near, or so I postulated, and meant to do us harm. Some dimension of discernment that I didn't access often alerted me to the threat. I don't have another answer for it. I didn't take much persuasion to abandon our nap and get the heck out of there. Of course, I had to retrieve something from the back of the car. I can't remember what held such importance, and stepped out into the darkness. The hatch, all of 6 feet away, seemed a mile amid the feeling of mounting dread. I've never again experienced that level of repression. As I buttoned up the car and jumped back into the driver's seat, and I saw nothing and heard nothing. But it, whatever it was there. Needless to say, there was a bit of gravel flying as we headed down the highway, and I was able to drive an additional 3 hours on pure adrenaline. Almost 30 years later, I can still conjure in my soul the horror of that feeling. Creepy stuff. Yeah, I think everybody can, can't they? Want to understand? After moving from California to Colorado to pursue greater aspirations, my wife and I had 3 kids and a pretty happy little life. When my oldest son hit the age of 7 or so, he had some interest in the Boy Scouts. As an introduction to the organization, we signed up for a weekend camping trip in the foothills of the Rockies. We met up with 8 or 10 other families and set up camp at an alpine location above Lyons, Colorado, if memory serves. I assembled our tent about 30-40 yards from the other families and threw our sleeping bags, packs, and such into the tent to join the rest for dinner. All in all, a decent bunch of folks. Now, keep in mind, I've spent countless weekends and summer vacations in the wilds of our country, camping, hiking, etc. Most of the time I did these things alone. So, irrational fear wasn't really a thing for me. I was awakened in the early hours of the morning to the sound of breathing. I listened from atop my sleeping bag. The breathing was not human. I then heard footsteps moving through the underbrush that sequentially grew closer. I thought black bear, possibly cougar. I was then, from out of nowhere, overtaken by a feeling of fear, as if someone had flipped a switch. It wasn't the pronounced horror from the story one, but fairly commanding nonetheless. My .44 Magnum safely tucked away at home due to it being a Boy Scouts outing. I pulled my knife from its sheath, determined to protect my young son as needed. It was little consolation. At one point, the walking, breathing thing pushed against the tent fabric as it circled the camp. This went on for what seemed like a couple of hours. That's so shitty. Shitty because there's children. I mean, come on. Pick on somebody more worthy. The sun began to brighten the sky. I was able to see the light through the tent's windows, with just the moral support I needed in the form of natural illumination to confront whatever was out there, and I could hear it was still out there. I extracted myself from the tent to face the unknown. To my chagrin, or maybe to my utter relief, I saw nothing. Not only was no creature, bear, mountain lion, or chipmunk evident, and standing ready to face my eventual bravery, not a sign existed of the creature's activity. Either I conjured the creature in my imagination or it disappeared without incident. I have no idea. All I know is that more than 20 years later, it still ranks as one of the strangest occurrences in my life. One last thing. Does this beast look like a dog to you? I found the photo as I wandered through an old design project in East Boston on Google Street View. There's something very creepy about the image. Well, let's have a look. Google Street View? All right, let me have a look and I'll pass it on to you guys. Hold on a minute. What do we got? I don't know what that is. Looks like its butt is to the right. Head to the left. Definitely built low to the ground. I don't know. Is it a French bulldog stuffing his face into something? I don't know. Have a look, you guys. What is that? Anyone? It doesn't even look like fur. In a way, it looks like an old carpet on top of it or a rug or something, but I don't know. Don't know. Very odd. Very odd to say the least. Here's the original. I don't know. Anybody know what that is? Don't know. Watch the comments in the below the video, and maybe somebody's going to chime in. I think you know what it was. The stage of the game, you know what it was, right? You know what it, excuse me, you know what it was. It's a funny side note where we were today is a hotbed. Who knows how many of these forest people are living right there where we are, where I go, looking for these elk in this one particular area. It's pretty remote. It's funny, a friend of mine who's with me, lifelong logger, hunting guide, fishing guide, we don't have one half a word. We don't talk to each other about this topic. He's not into it. I respect that, and I don't care. I'll tell you what, we're walking up the river today, and I looked up ahead, and it almost was looking like a perfect torso, shoulders, bit of a head, jet black, and it looked like it rose up out of the willows, up the river. And I remember looking, thinking, oh, here we go again. I remember thinking that vividly this morning. Oh, shit, here we go. Here's a stump. Stump I hadn't noticed, and the way I was moving across the river bar and rising up or dropping down, whatever, gave me that look. But I was not thinking about these people at all. But it just reminded me of how you don't think you're thinking about it, but you are. Because it's like you recognize that form, whoa, and you're just taken back there like, boom, just like that, when you're not even thinking about it. My short experience is the title of this next email. Howdy, Steve. Feel free to use my name. I'm Zach Ballard, a traveling livestock auctioneer from central South Dakota. Although I live in South Dakota, now this story takes place in south central Iowa, where I was born and raised and grew up hunting and fishing near the town of Chariton. Chariton? Chariton. I get a lot of windshield time driving from auction to auction. And I've been listening to channel for a while now, and I've been debating on whether or not to write into you. Finally pulled the trigger, so here it goes. Right on, man. I'm happy you did. I believe I was around 10 to 12 years old. I'm 30 now. My dad and I were over at my grandparents' farm, messing around all day, and we're headed back to our house in the pickup when my dad slowed the pickup down. Looked off to the side of the road and said, I think I just saw a bear. Me, only being 10 to 12 at the time, knew there were no bears in Iowa, but believed him because, hey, he's my dad. He said we're going to the house to get the camera. Now, side note, I've listened to your channel for a while now, and this is where the story got a tad unbelievable, but stay with me. So from where my dad seen the, quote, bear, end quote, and to our house was roughly 5 miles. So there and back 10 minutes roughly, Dad ran inside, grabbed the camera, and we rushed back to the spot he had seen the bear. As we pulled up to the spot, I looked out in the field on my side of the pickup and seen a black blob, which is about 150 to 200 yards away. I said, there it is. We came to a stop, and that black blob wasn't a bear. It looked more like a gorilla on all fours, just staring at us. I asked, what's that? Dad said, I think it's a gorilla that escaped from the zoo or something and was roaming the backwoods of Iowa. We sat there for what felt like 5 minutes, just staring at it, and it never moved. Dad handed me the camera and said, here, snap a couple of pictures, or no one will believe us. This was a janky old camera with no zoom, and it was an actual film camera. Well, I snapped a couple of pictures, and it still never moved. Thought to myself, oh, I better turn the flash on. That will make for a better picture. I took a picture with the flash, and then this, quote, gorilla, end quote, stood up. It had to be 10 to 12 feet tall. To best describe it, it had coal black, medium-long hair with a cone-shaped head, arms that hung down to mid-height. Mid-height? Probably meant mid-height. and pure mass. Just huge. It took about 4 huge strides, never taking its eyes off of us, and gone into the timber. The timberline was kind of a finger draw, so Dad slammed the gas and tried to catch another glimpse of the creature on the other side of the finger, but we never seen it again. We took the long way home, neither of us really saying much, just in awe of what we had just saw. We made it home, and Dad said, "Let's call your grandpa Rick," which would be my mom's dad. He's hunted his whole life. My dad had as well, so I'm sure Dad figured I might have seen something similar. Well, Dad me call and explain to Grandpa what we saw and asked if he'd ever seen anything like it. My grandpa always used the speakerphone on the house phone, and my uncle happened to be there at the same time we called. Well, they both just laughed their asses off at us and called us crazy. I hung the phone up, and Dad said, "Well, we best not speak about this to anyone else." The memory of that evening kind of got placed in the back of my mind for a while until I started hunting on my own more. It always makes it harder to walk to a tree stand in the dark of morning and evenings knowing what's in the dark or could be. Right? I can relate. I've never had another experience, but listening to your channel and everyone's stories lately gets me thinking about that day more and more lately. Well, anyway, that's my story. Not much but a sabe, nonetheless. Thanks, Steve, for taking the time to read this. Happy trails, Zach. P.S. I've been thinking. Wonder if these beings think they are cloaked sometimes. Maybe their cloaking systems are broke and they don't know it. Like the one in my story, just sitting there in the middle of the field, thinking it's hiding. Or others just walking by some people, not acknowledging them walking by. Walking by them in the daylight. Just a thought. You never know. Who knows? I know one thing. The people that are listening to your email today are going to be screaming, "Where's the pictures?" Right? I'm not screaming it, but you know they are. If you want to send them, go ahead. I'll share them. Or not. But they're going to be very curious what happened to your photos. More members inducted into the Club of No Return. No Way Out. Didn't ask to be here. Right? What do we got here? I'm going to read one more and then I'm going to get going. A Different Perspective is the title of this email. Hello, Steve. First, please not share my name. My friends simply refer to me as Miss B. I have not identified any locations either. Maybe I'll be brave enough at some point. After listening to your video, Sasquatch Explained in detail, I decided to reach out with my own story and current observations. I say current because I believe we simply do not have enough information to draw any conclusions yet. So I do not strive to answer any questions or debate any particular view, but maybe present a way of looking through the lens a different way. I love that. I try to do that all the time. I have been curious, since I was very young, about the topics of bipeds, aliens, supernatural experiences, and those who have passed, and the science around consciousness, energy, and multiple dimensions, etc. I consider myself as open-minded, curious, and evidence-based. Open-minded enough to say I know enough about what seems to be happening to say, quote, "I simply don't know," end quote. This follows my favorite physicist, Neil Tyson deGrasse, advice to, quote, "know enough about something to know you're wrong," end quote. Beginning in my childhood, I had a number of experiences beginning at the age of 8. The first occurred riding in the back of my father's pickup on our way home from an outing. It was foggy, and we were driving home via the back roads. My brother, sister, and I were in the back goofing around with no seat belts. Different times, right? And all of a sudden, my brother and I looked out the back and saw a very large being standing in the middle of the road. The thing that struck us the most is how he/she appeared so quickly and vividly in the middle of a heavy fall-time fog. It was clear to us it was no animal we're familiar with. Neither of us felt fear, just confusion and what the F, if you catch my drift. Another experience revolves around growing up in a heavily wooded area, as was common back then in the 70s. We were allowed to roam wherever we wanted as long as we were home in time for dinner. If the porch light was on, we were expected to show up in minutes. My best friend lived down a dirt road and around a lake where we swam every summer. Between my friend's house and mine, there was a wooded, swampy area I had to go past on my way home. Several times each year, I go to that point and froze with a fight or flight feeling. It was so strong. I knew something was there watching me. I stood for several minutes deciding whether to turn around or suffer the wrath of my father. I chose to run as fast as I could past the area into the garage and house, falling against a wall in relief as if I had escaped death itself. Youthful imagination, maybe, but why does it seem so real 50 years later? Right? As I grew older and turned 17, my sister, 1 year older, and I were driving home late at night. Can't remember what time exactly, but it was dark. And as we drove down the quarter-mile dirt road to our house, we both saw behind a row of tall trees a brightly colored craft rise in the air and take off. A craft unlike anything we knew to exist. Seriously, if you questioned us both separately, after all these years, you would hear the same account. No doubt. Through the years, we have all studied different expert views on each of these subjects. The list is long, but includes the likes of Dave, Greg Braden, Bob Lazar, George Knapp, David Childress, George Norrie, Linda Moulton Howe, Graham Hancock, the work of M.K. Davis, and so many more. And fast forward to today. There are many more experiences I could share, but believe I have said enough to propose a few questions for consideration. If we are experiencing beings who are engineered to be slaves and who may reside in our national parks and wilderness areas, is it possible that they may be trying to warn us to stay away from these areas for our own safety? Maybe they know more about us than we know about them. Maybe they see us as naive and not ready to understand the bigger picture. Maybe we are still too focused on our primal need to dominate, control, and conquer our world. Are we so mesmerized by our technology, which is clearly in its infancy, thinking we know what we're doing, let alone where we're going? Are we more focused on getting views and making money rather than seeing what is really going on around us? Are those who have traveled naively into the wilderness and even around our cities being taken because they have unwittingly ventured into forbidden areas? For those who know and won't share, is it because they are too self-centered to see the long-term impact on humanity, or are they really trying to protect us? I came upon this perspective thinking about raising my own daughter, and how, at the age of 3, I thought it was funny to run into the street thinking it was a game. We lived on a busy road, and it finally took a couple of good swats across the backside and some very stern words to convince her of the danger. I don't know, Steve, but I appreciate you and your channel. There are a lot of us who may not comment, are on the fence, or are simply too afraid to consider the possibilities. To me, it feels like we are simply children who are about to discover the world and universe are much bigger than the current sandbox we play in, and is obviously so much more complex than we could ever have dreamed. Absolutely agree. Oh, and one last note. I respect the work of Dave P., who I've copied here immensely. His evidence-based research is impeccable. To both of you, I humbly remind you of Shakespeare's writings, quote, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Huzzah to nature. Respectfully, Miss B." Appreciate your email, Miss B. You're a smart cookie. The wheels are turning. Hopefully the people listening's wheels are turning as well. Or getting greased, at least, and getting ready to turn. Right? There we go. We heard from more great people again today. I'm not going to stop. I said I'll read them all. Might take me frickin' years, but I said it, so I'm in. I'm going to do it, and everybody's going to be heard. Now, Off I go. Tomorrow I'm going to sleep in. Tomorrow I'll do it. I'll sleep in. Tomorrow we get Chippy back. Little Chippy's coming back to hang with us. And he's probably going to want me to take him on a mock bear hunt again. Maybe we'll take him down the river. The river's full of salmon. There's bears around. Lots of adventure. Maybe I'll do that. Or if I could talk Sarah into it, maybe we could put little Chippy in the truck at 4:30 in the morning, asleep. Drive softly. And maybe take him down to the secret river hole where there's monster Roosevelt elk running around. And maybe I could call one in with him. Wouldn't that be something else for a 3 or 4-year-old? We'll see. We'll see. Share my story at howtohunt.com. If you got some truth that needs to be heard, email it. I'll read it word for word. Sarah's decals are there in the link below. Please make sure you put your correct address. Please. Double check. I passed the message on. She was quite upset yesterday, and I was kind of giggling a little bit, and then I got in trouble for giggling about it because it's cost her money. My hunting apps that have absolute true knowledge without any sponsorship whatsoever. Nothing. Not one item is marketed, promoted, or pushed in your direction. Only true hunting knowledge, which is all you need. That is ready to rip and smooth. Again, if you do get the apps, make sure you have very strong Wi-Fi to download all the content first, okay? Because some of you may have a weak connection that makes the content not load properly. So you need a very strong internet connection to load the apps. And then you select all the different tips that you want to take with you on your hunt. And then you can use them without the internet connection. All the regulations for the hunting regulations are in there up to date. And one day, I'm going to try to refilm all of the information and slam it in there again. Although the information still is the useful part, right? It's not meant to razzle dazzle at all. It's meant to help you get better and become successful. All right? There you go. I'm done babbling. I should be back tomorrow. Hope everyone's safe.